Lovely. Okay.
1, 2, 3.
Welcome to all our comrades around the world to the Socialist Sunday stream.
Welcome everybody to the Socialist Sunday stream. We have a very special guest today with us. His name is Zahn Zee. Welcome, Zahn Zee, to the Socialist Sunday stream.
Hello, welcome all.
Of course, we got Kathrin with us
Hey.
on audio only today because, circumstances, but she's going to be just fine. And we got Paul with us as well.
What's the crack?
So, Zahn Zee, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, what's your beeswax?
Well, a little bit of me. I'm an Irish leftist socialist Republican of the left variety.
Yes.
Very specific yet very vague. The goal in a lot of that is because I don't know exactly what I am, and I don't trust people who know what they are, because I just have a suspicion that they're tied up in ideology of saying what they want to be rather than what they are. So I'm very keen in kind of chasing down and chatting to people to find out all of the different kind of varieties. I'm deeply passionate about sociology and philosophy and politics, because just from my people who say like don't get political, everything is fucking political. The sooner you figure this out, the sooner you can grow up. And that's basically my life's work and journey. I like people, I like systems, I like society, and I want them all just to get along.
Good.
Yo, fantastic.
You have a great podcast as what's the name of it? Think Left, right?
Left thinking.
Left Thinking. How can we find it? I'm gonna need a link for later to put in the box down there. So
I have a playlist actually that I can put up. I should know how all of this fucking works. There should be a chat. There's the chat. Yeah, I'll post the link for us, the playlist. I made the playlist for these exact situations. Where am I going?
Popped it into
There
the
you go.
chat.
I'll just
maybe
I'll post it in the chat here now.
yeah, and
into the
for
info box
people
then
who
as
are
well.
watching this after
Yeah.
the fact, it will be probably in the description box below. Just I didn't have time to put it like right now.
Not a bother.
But it'll be happening soon. We all have been there. Paul has been. Oh, Paul, you haven't been to the podcast yet, right?
I haven't been
Paul
on Left Thinking. Not yet.
Paul was originally supposed to be the
Sorry.
first person, but
I'm such a prick. I'm sorry about
twice
that.
you had to cancel due to extenuous
I'm
circumstances.
Very
in that
sorry
time-
about that.
No, you're fine.
Fucking hell,
You
I'm sorry.
literally had like genuine proper issues come up, and the way I would put it is like I'm a recreational online leftist. It's the I just found it funny because originally I was supposed to have Paul on first in the kind of the build up to the Irish general election, and then we were going to have a chat after the election in terms of like the lay of the land. Fun fact, I can still have you on for that exact same conversation because nothing's fucking changed.
Nothing's fucking changed, man.
Nothing has
Nuts.
changed.
Yeah, here we are heading back into the same fucking centre-right bullshit. Although the veil's coming off now, we're seeing that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are basically the same fucking party now. Like any
Oh, yeah, they
pretenses
just
that they
need to
had
kiss and make
before,
up.
you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, we can still definitely do that. Sorry, yeah, I don't know. I got sick there, and I haven't quite recovered. I kind of got to about 90% recovery, and I'm still kind of struggling with one or two different things. But anyway, sorry, I kind of went off a little
Something
bit
tells
tangent
me
there.
that the next one you're gonna do is gonna be presential. You're gonna be hanging out in a pub with a recorder and just
7
having
hour
a
walk.
nice conversation. Yeah.
I don't know what it is about pubs, but they just put me. I need to get over my aversion to pubs because that's where the people are and you can chat to people. But it's a huge part of why I hate pubs is because it's my relationship with sport is that I used to be a rugby union referee. So not only do I understand the laws, I actually I get why things get adjudicated the way they do. So whenever you're in a room full of like 50, 60 people screaming in a referee's decision that was perfectly justified, nothing makes you feel more alienated than that. Because if you in any way speak up for the referee, you get kicked out of the pub. So I need to get back in there.
I hear you.
Yeah, And then on top of that, you're like, hey, everybody, we should do communism. And then they're just like, what the fuck? Get out of here.
What's funny is it's not as alien as it seems. Everyone understands the concept of a round. It's who has provides, each according to their needs, to those according to their ability. We get it instinctively.
Also,
just when you say the word.
a room full of screaming people for the audio, not so good maybe. So maybe in the park, but presential, hanging out in a library in the park in a nice quiet environment where you can have a recorder and just have a nice chat and do what we all would want to do, which is hang out together.
Yeah.
And we're doing this
Absolutely.
other thing, which is like the next best thing.
Can I just say, Paul, it's so funny. I feel like you've become like 20% more Irish on this stream.
I feel like I've got the green light. I've got the green light to just be fucking Irish today, rather than trying to put on like the fucking internationalist pretense of, hello guys, how do you do today? I'll use my credit card.
Embrace the Irish in you.
Like, fuck it, this is gonna be me today.
Wonderful. Irish takeover. I'm in for this. Yes.
I'm trying to do more of that, to be honest with you.
The inside joke that'll happen for the Irish in the audience will understand this one, and everybody else, except the British maybe, it's he hasn't gotten more Irish, he's gotten more Fenian.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I'm sorry.
It's probably a conversation for another day. I think we can go off down go down a rabbit hole there.
It's the one thing that I'll say is that I leave this hanging for anyone who wants to do it. Look into the Fenian Manifesto that was released in 1886. It was the same year as Das Kapital. It unmistakably sets out the idea that Irish independence was deeply Marxist inspired, almost uniquely down a class divide. They explicitly say they want universal suffrage along class lines to liberate the working class.
Oh yeah, 100%. Oh yeah, I mean, like, look, even going back to like the father of Irish republicanism, Wolfe Tone. I mean, like, it's all about it's the men of no property. Do you know what I mean? Like, if those people who have wealth won't help us, then it'll be about that noble class, the men of no property, like the proletariat. It was always about the proletariat. And that's why, sort of people sometimes kind of side-eye me a bit when I say that, republicanism in the Irish context is the left-wing position, well, that's the legacy we're building off now. And but again, there are obviously some issues, there are some difficulties, there are people on the right wing who will sort of take up the mantle of Republican sometimes, and especially nationalism as well. And they kind of obscure things a little bit, and I don't know. I think we probably need to reassert that working class line and how that's always existed. So we need to work on that and putting that across.
The way I think about it is that nationalism is like nuclear power. It on its own isn't inherently good or bad. It depends entirely upon the intention of how it's used. James Connolly wrote an essay called Nationalism and Socialism, where he outlines that. It's phenomenal. I read it on stream the other day because it's vital, essential introductory learning. But he very 100%. Clearly outlines that nationalism, if left to its own devices, kind of just degenerates into right wing, kind of the allure of vanity of your history exists to prop you up rather than to give you kind of an illustration of where you've been as to where to go. What defines right wing nationalism is an obsession with looking back. What defines left wing nationalism is with an insistence to look forward. That's the difference.
100%. That's so important. Like people across the world now are saying that the rise of Sinn Féin is akin to the rise of the Nazis. Like, and you're like, what the fuck? Hang on, like they've got like they've got like that was literally published. I think it was published like the New York Times or something like that. Well, maybe it wasn't New York Times, but in some newspaper they said that after Sinn Féin did quite well in the election. But that is really, really essential. It's key. We do need to put forward that pro-nationalist line, but people need to understand that our nationalism doesn't look back to some bygone era, some mythologized past of the golden days. A lot of nationalism in many of the sort of imperialist cores in former colonizer countries like the UK or let's say the US, France, Germany, they look back on the good old days and say things were so much better back then. Whereas for us, like if we want to look backwards and say and think about the good old days, like we need to go back about 950 years.
Yeah.
You know, that's a much harder sell. You know, because we can't say Jesus was never much better back in the 1960s or 1970s or 1950s, because it wasn't. Like Ireland was really Ireland was really very much in that sort of third world country period. And I know that's a problematic term, but yeah, it is very much about looking forward and harnessing that sort of potentiality of nationalism. But you know, one thing that I think is quite interesting is that there are some sections even within Ireland on the socialist left who would try to deny the socialist the nationalist and the patriotic side of Connolly. And that's one thing that people don't realize. One thing that Connolly said just before he died to his daughter, he said that socialists are going to forget that I am here as an Irishman first. You know, so socialists are going to sort of just extract the nationalist part of them. They're going to take that out because that's a little bit tricky. That's a harder sell on the international stage. You know.
Yeah.
So and there are certain parties in Ireland that would sort of reject that nationalism. Because I think, as you've alluded to as well, nationalism on its own doesn't really get us too far. It's nationalism. It needs to be infused with that emancipatory proletarian analysis. Otherwise, it just doesn't really get us anywhere. You know. So you can understand why some people would just sort of say, "Nah, fuck it. It's not even worth it. It's kind of worthless." And yet, it's such a mobilizing factor for such a large part of the population that to ignore nationalism in the Irish context is it's political suicide almost, you know.
And
So
it ties into another element that I think is very important to understand as well. And we saw the forgetting of what I'm about to talk about to the detriment in the UK and Brexit, where it was the beginning of Connolly kind of announcing a sentiment that I strongly believe, and I find very difficult to explain to people, and that it's nationality has fuck all to do with the soil of a place. Nationality is about a shared collective vision for a peoples of a place. Like you just said there, Connolly saw himself as an Irishman, despite being born in Scotland as a British citizen, and then spending a lot of his life working trade union jobs in the United States. He was very much an internationalist in the degree where his nationality was more about the peoples he wanted to accentuate and develop. And I choose those words appropriately: accentuate and to develop, not to protect or defend. It's not that kind of the infantilization of kind of a local domestic group of, like I said earlier, and that inherently fascistic idea of that what's keeping us from greatness is a parasitic overclass. His perspective of the Irish is what's keeping them down is the perspective that somebody else wants to hold them down. So if you develop them, they will be able to resist that. And to me, that is a huge part of what nationality is. And I feel we need to develop this idea because it is a perfect antidote to xenophobia, where there's a Green Party councillor in Ireland. I can't remember if she's a TD or a councillor, but she's I think she's a second generation immigrant, where like she is born in Ireland, but her parents were Chinese. So she experiences an awful lot of xenophobia for being Chinese, despite being Irish in all of the ways that should matter to a nationalist. Her being Irish is linked in her it's her perspective that she wants the best for the society and the groups that she's within. And the way that I always put it is like, if you are born in, say, Sao Paulo, and you come over to Ireland after like 40 years traveling the world, and if you're 20 minutes in a borough of Dublin and you say, you know what, I respect the Constitution, I want to get rid of private property, and I want to enshrine housing as a human right, and I want the Irish people to be able to look after themselves, you're fucking Irish by my books, because you care about the development of the people on that place.
Yes, 100%. That was actually that exact idea was expressed like in the 1700s. I remember just reading, there was like this little snippet from some like old these really old sort of proto Republicans, and I wish I had it right now, but it was that like it was talking about how like the people of Africa or the people of anywhere in the world who wants to align themselves with the struggle for Irish national liberation is part of the Irish nationalist struggle. You can be a part of it. It's about where your alliance and your allegiance lies, rather than, you know, whether you're born on this soil or some just silly nonsensical idea, you know. So Yeah, I mean, obviously people can take issue with that for whatever reasons, but yeah, the exact sentiment you're expressing has been expressed for hundreds of years in Ireland, and yeah, it's really nice to sort of hammer that home to people who would say things like, oh, all nationalism's bad and all of these things, and it's like, no, as you said, there's more to it than just that sort of black and white view, you know.
And the ulterior motive is, I want to take nationalism away from the right wing because it's something that appeals to the broader public, because national pride isn't inherently bad. Like, patriotism isn't inherently a bad thing.
Agreed.
Like one of the elements where my envisioning of kind of like a socialist state, if foreign imperialists try to invade, you're going to try whip up patriotic sentiment to defend that system. Nationalism can be very important in that regard. It's all about trying to make sure that it doesn't get co-opted, toxified, and perversed into a kind of supporting bigotry, xenophobia, racism, sexism, all these different things. Nationalism shouldn't be a vehicle for a far-right agenda.
I completely agree. And I think that if we abandon nationalism, then we cede a lot of ground to the right wing, because the right wing will say, yes, we here, you want your nationalism, we got it for you. You know, we got you covered. But, you know, historically, like the vast majority of socialist movements, successful socialist revolutions have been along nationalist lines. You know, even places like Cuba, Vietnam, they all took on this nationalist idea, protecting their national identity. You know, there's this foreign invader who's trying to take away all parts of our culture, like our language. I mean, in Ireland, we can really fucking feel that. What language are we speaking now? You know, we're speaking English. You know, I've got about 10 sentences of Squelga. That's it.
That loosely translates to, I'm not able to speak Irish because I don't understand the words.
Yeah, absolutely agreed on that one. I don't even know how to say I agree in Irish. How fucking embarrassing is that? Yeah, but yeah, that's exactly it. That is one of the things that I think that we on the left, and I think we can probably segue into our conversation about what the left is now. One of the things on the left is that I think that we often do cede too much territory to the right wing, because we often define our position by what's not the right wing position, and as a result of that, we often have a lot of problematic views and sort of inconsistent views. Like, for example, a lot of people and I know this is kind of a divisive topic and stuff like that, but the socialist, the left-wing perspective on Brexit was completely destroyed. That wasn't put forward. The left-wing Brexit position was never put forward, really, like in the mainstream, because so many people on the centre and the centre-left, they wanted to say, no, we're not the right wing. We're not these xenophobic bigots. We're not these fascistic, or at least proto-fascistic fuckers. So our position as anti-fascists needs to be that we want to stay within the European Union. You know, rather than understanding the role of the EU imperialism and all of these things, and getting into a much deeper understanding of it, getting beyond this sort of narrow anti-fascist perspective. And of course, anti-fascism is a really, really good starting point. Don't get me wrong. It's a very, very important starting point. But when we define our politics purely as being in opposition to the right wing, purely that way, we completely just we let them set the terms by which we operate, and that's we're not gonna bring about socialism by doing that. You know,
if your local community Nazi adopts a child from an orphanage, the left-wing position isn't then to burn down the orphanage.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
The really annoying thing about it, when it comes to the EU, I think the reason the EU doesn't get discussed that often is because there's an English-speaking bias online. So you have Ireland, which is completely financially indebted to the European Union, because start off at the beginning, 50 years ago, we were a ridiculously poor country. Here's a very fun fact. In like 1930, we were poorer than we were in like the 1500s. That we were poorer post-industrialization than we were pre-industrialization. That should kind of tell you where Ireland was. So us being a first world country, and we're ridiculously wealthy per head of capita. It's crazy. We have the EU to benefit for all of that. A lot of our infrastructure was EU built. So you don't hear that much anti-EU sentiment from Irish, especially even Irish socialists. It tends to be kind of like the Maoist party in Ireland that has the anti-EU perspective. And then you have the UK perspective in terms of the English-speaking online left, where they've never been pro-Europe in a way. They've been a part of Europe, but they've always seen themselves as at odds with them because, like, it's the European history of England versus the rest of the continent was we're an island, stop trying to claim us as your own. So you have that separation of identity, and then you have the Americans who Europe is a country, not a political union to them. So I don't think they have an opinion on the whole thing. So there's an absolute void of leftist criticism of the EU. And that's why Brexit was so annoying, because, like we said, the right-wing position became to be anti-EU. So then the left-wing position became being pro an undemocratic neoliberal institution that that restricted liberal reforms of austerity in Greece. It made a mockery of the entire position, which a good critical analysis would make you wonder why people hold it. It's like how I said at the very beginning, the reason I'm skeptical of people who so securely claim what they are is because I think they're describing what they want to be rather than what they honestly see themselves as.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good point. And I think that especially we often have this in left-wing spaces, and this is something that I think a lot of people are sort of pushing back against now. I'm thinking like Angie Speaks, Kelly Zahos, like on YouTube and stuff like that, they're sort of pushing back against the way neoliberalism is omnipresent within our movements, and we often take the neoliberal perspective as being the left-wing perspective, and we've internalized that. Even us actually on the left, proclaimed socialists, proclaimed communists, anarchists, we're actually, even though we can often strike these very radical poses, or at least, this affect of being very radical, we can sort of put on this, our radical hats, pretend we're these revolutionaries, but ultimately we're giving out the same, we're pushing the exact same message that the liberals are pushing, one which is maybe social democratic at best, and that's a real issue that I think we need to sort of move beyond,
Yeah, I think one of the elements that gets difficult as well is because I feel neoliberalism is one of those things where people don't intuitively understand why it is anti-left wing. The reason I say anti-left wing and not pro-right wing is because I don't think neoliberalism actually gives a shit. It's just hyper-individualism. And I think one of the elements is because that it's, if you haven't read a bit of Hegel and then as a result read what Marx said about Hegel, you don't intuitively understand why neoliberalism destroys the Marxist analysis of society. I'll very quickly go through all of it for the audience. There's a concept that Hegel put forward called the Hegelian dialectic that put forward the idea that the way you view the world affects the world itself, in terms of like that. He would have put forward kind of what now would be called the bootstrap argument of you're poor because you think of yourself as poor. And if you stop thinking of yourself as poor and actually start thinking of all of the ways you can better your life, you will see material changes in your environment and you will rage yourself out. Marx basically came along and said, you're not wrong except in all of the ways you are. And he just flipped the entire thing and said, the way you think about life is actually directly caused by your material circumstances. You think you're poor because you're poor. And because you're poor, you can't not think of yourself as being poor. And I'm going to add one thing onto this, that there's a French philosopher called Louis Althusser, I think that's his name. I'm researching him at the moment, where he put forward the idea like that mainly what he studied was the concept of ideology. And in terms of how those two things that I just mentioned, how they link together is Althusser's concept of ideology are all of the things you do without really realizing that you're doing it. The best example is if you're walking down the street and somebody stops you, says, hi, how are you doing? And they put out their hand. You instinctively shake their hand, despite having no idea where you learned that, why you're doing it, or even if that's actually kind of a custom you shouldn't do. It's an ideological stance where you're being informed by your society. And that last sentence is crucial. It's you're informed by your society to do these things. And that's where kind of the Marxist dialectic comes in there, where if you live in that society, if you're working class, you then internalize all of these working class behaviors. And to tie all that to the very end, because we live in a neoliberal society, a lot of our societal kind of hiccups and mannerisms are neoliberal. So we will take that into our conversations with us. And neoliberalism, I can sum it up basically with a Margaret Thatcher quote: "There is no such thing as society. There is just the individual." And if you dissolve the concept of society, you break down the Marxist critique of society. If there is no society, then there's no such thing as class. That's why neoliberalism is inherently anti-left wing.
Absolutely. How can we mobilize around that? There's no way if we're all just these isolated, atomized individuals. There is no. Yeah. I've had people come at me and say, Paul, you talk about things like the masses, the proletariat, as though this exists. We're all just individuals, and these are like self-proclaimed leftists. I'm like, whoa, what the fuck? How is this helpful in terms of actually organizing to bring about social, political, economic change, justice for all of us? How is this helpful? Because I think that often we can sort of fall down the rabbit hole of getting into sort of postmodernism, post-structuralism, and all these kinds of ideas, and they can be kind of exciting and fun, and they're sort of interesting to explore. It's nice to sit down and read a little bit of Judith Butler, but like, how is this actually going to help you? Like, how is this actually going to help in terms of mobilizing the working class to bring about socialism and stuff like that? And then of course also Judith Butler doesn't even support Bernie Sanders, supports like Elizabeth Warren, and you're just like, oh, okay. Makes sense. These people actually aren't helping us in terms of building revolutionary momentum, and ultimately it just serves to sort of reinforce individualism while striking this very radical pose. I think they even abandoned the sort of pretense of them being left-wing after a while. People like Judith Butler call themselves radical centrists at this stage, which, by the way, putting the word radical in front of something doesn't make it radical. Just because they call themselves a radical centrist, that doesn't actually it just doesn't actually change anything. But yeah, so anyway, we really need to get away from this cult of individualism, and that's tough.
I can very quickly give a defense of the concept of radical centrism. For all of his faults, I actually think J-Reg made a really good argument for what radical centrism is. Radical centrism is the appropriation of a very extreme idea to combat another extreme idea. So you end up finding a happy medium. For instance, right now, a very far-right American fascistic government is willing to adopt welfare capitalism to prevent the collapse of the stock exchange. That is very radical centrism in terms of how people are defending it. Because you get a lot of people who are kind of saying, oh, well, that's socialist. No, they've no idea what they're talking about. It's that it's you internalize a contradiction, so you meet at a middle ground. That's radical centrism.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like thesis.
And the reason it's radical is because you're adopting extremist views.
Yeah, I suppose you're just moving the goalposts to a much further position. Yeah. I sometimes I like moving those. I like shifting goalposts around a little bit. Like, I give people sort of like positions. Like, okay, so here's the spectrum. You can be like ultra lefts, or you can be like center lefts, and then it's like, okay, well, communism is like the middle ground between those two things. Like when people talk about like left communism and right communism and stuff like that, and you're just like, oh, okay, there's like you're sort of setting them up between this very like specific boundary. Because what's happened in our society right now, like especially in places like the US, is that like the Overton window has shifted so far to the right that there is no left wing, and that the left wing is actually the center right wing. So the Democratic Party is the center right party. Although the Republican Party seems to be, moving even to the left of them economically at the moment. And the Republican Party is, of course, a right-wing party. So you've got that massive shift of the Overton window to the right. And sometimes I think we kind of need to push back on that as well. Give people, are you a Marxist-Leninist or an anarchist? Or are you a centrist? Which is like between the two of those. Yeah. And it's like, wait, those are our options.
just to very quickly push back a little, I would disagree that the Republicans are moving left economically. For the
sorry, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that they were moving left economic. I meant that they were moving to the left of the Democratic Party.
Oh, okay, now I get what you mean. Yeah.
As in, they're still right wing, very much.
It's a topic that I'd still like to just quickly unpack, just because I see a lot of people online not understanding that idea about like it's like how having welfare programs isn't inherently left wing. And it comes down to there's a tweet I had a few weeks ago where one of the principal definitions of fascism is the idea that people are the property of the state. So when the Trump government releases a welfare package, all they're doing is bringing their property in for a service. They don't view you as being alive and well, and they're keeping you as an irrational actor. No, they're protecting the cogs in their giant machine. They're just viewing you as a factory that needs servicing. That's why they're still very right wing, because they're upholding. The point of that stimulus package is to uphold the hierarchy. That's the key part there.
That's it. That's actually a really, really good point. And that kind of probably brings us to, like, we've just been talking nonsense. We're not talking about any of the topics that we talked about so far. But that actually brings us to the question of, what is left wing? What does it mean to be left wing? What is that? And like, does social democracy fit into that? Is it in lines? So where do we sit on this? And maybe we'll open it up to everybody here and see what everybody thinks. How do we define left wing? What does left wing mean to use? And of course, there is a historical definition of that. You know, you can get back to the French Revolution and so on and so forth. But does anyone want to sort of jump in and just think and just say like what they feel is left wing, what isn't left wing? What do these words even mean? Do they have meaning? What do we think? Anyone want to take it?
I'll open it to the floor because I've been doing a lot of talking.
Ditto. Abby? Kat?
I made a video about it back in the day, and I didn't get a conclusion. It's like left wing is whatever you want it to be. Like historically, do we want to analyze it like as the origin of the word, or do we want to analyze it like from the first, people, who were willing to share their resources of their societies in common? So it's difficult. What is being a leftist? It's whatever you want it to be, as long as, for me, it's not leaving anyone behind and not figuring out how to, at this point of history, how to undo those fucked up systems that fuck people by the masses. So,
Yeah.
you take it away, Kathrin, because people are calling for you. So, go for it. Take it away.
Yeah, sorry, for everyone, just so you know, the reason I'm just doing voice and I'm quite quiet at the moment is that I'm still having some symptoms of the virus and my head's really pounding. So if I'm more quiet than normal, it's not that I'm not interested in the conversation or anything. I'm just not feeling that well. But for me, I think one of the key things of being a leftist is that you have to be fundamentally anti-capitalism. And for that reason, I wouldn't really consider like liberals to be leftists. And I think, and it would have to entail also, everyone having the basic access to food, shelter, water, and the basic things you need for to live a happy, good life. I think that's like the key to being a leftist, I guess. And within that, you can be, I don't know, a Marxist, an anarchist, whatever. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think it's that helpful to, because within that, liberals wouldn't really be considered leftists, but often that can just lead to us, if we're like saying to liberals, oh, you're not part of this, you're not a leftist, often that just ends up ostracizing people further and then moving them away from wanting to come anywhere towards the left, because we're like, oh, you can't be part of this, you're not. I don't know, I often think it leads to unhelpful conversations and unhelpful Twitter arguments between liberals and leftists. And I think there's ways to explain that, and I think it's important to make that distinction, in my opinion, but between liberals and leftists, and that liberals wouldn't be considered, and that like being anti-capitalist is fundamental. But I don't think that a lot of the ways in which we have these conversations is helpful, and I think that we could be explaining these things to liberals a little bit better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Otherwise, we do run the risk of just alienating people and just saying, and doing a lot of purity testing, and you're not a real leftist, and sort of just being very, very condescending, just being kind of shitty about it. So we do need to sort of be careful with that, because I mean, you make more friends with, what is it? Make more friends with honey than you do with vinegar, something like that. So yeah. The way I've always seen it, and I suppose this is colored a little bit by the Socialist Republicanism. I generally see the left wing as being the people who want progress, who want historical progress to move on, to progress in society. And I see the right wing as the people who want to regress, they want to go backwards. The center, to me, are the people who just sort of want to keep things as they are, maintain things as they are. Within that framework, of course, like, and I think we're going to probably have to talk a little bit about like Irish social democratic parties like Sinn Féin and stuff like that, because it's kind of complicated with their position within the national liberation struggle of Ireland and stuff like that. But generally, I would see the left as being comprised of three main factions. First, Marxists, Marxist-Leninists primarily, but of course including Marxist-Leninist Maoists, and a few other sort of factions as well. Secondly, the anarchist tradition. And thirdly, the social democratic tradition. And I would actually include social democrats now. And I think that Zahn and I might disagree on this one. And I think there'd be an interesting conversation to have there. For me, I would put the center left as being part of the left. And the reason why I would say that is that all of us have the shared ideal, the idea we want, all of us fundamentally want a society where there is abundance, where people can live freely. They don't need to be worried about healthcare, education, food. We're free to have the best quality of life possible, free of exploitation, free of oppression, all of those things. And Marxist-Leninists have one way of getting there, anarchists have another way of getting there. And those two camps very much capitalism as an impediment to getting to this society of abundance and freedom, whereas the social democrats believe that this society of abundance and freedom can be achieved through capitalism, through capitalist means. We just sort of need to patch it up a little bit, but ultimately we can get to that post-scarcity society, even though it's not, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. It needs to be sort of heavily reinforced with like a welfare system and so on and so forth. So that's sort of how I would see it. And yeah, but yeah, I think we might have a different perspective now. So do you want to jump in, Zahn, and say how you would say it?
I do personally disagree that Soc Dems would be left. However, I do completely agree with yourself and Kathrin's point that the discussion has to not be alienating and not to ostracize them, because exactly like you said, the way I often put it is that Soc Dems are center left, which descriptively makes them more loyal to the center than the left. So I describe them as being centrists. The way I often describe that is, to use an analogy, capitalism is like having a tiger in your living room and there's a small child in the living room. Capitalists will say, well, it's up to the child to not get mauled by the tiger. A social democrat will say, well, how about we declaw the tiger to protect the child from capitalism? Whereas the socialist will say, no, let the tiger out. Do not let capitalism near my child. That's the way I think about it. Soc Dems, they're more loyal to capitalism than socialism, which is what means to me that they're more loyal to the center than the left. So it just doesn't sit well with me to call them leftists. However, the second part of what I'm going to say will hopefully add nuance to all of this. My perspective of what I see left and right as is, I very quickly just want to go through. There was a philosopher and Buddhist called Alan Watts, who put forward an idea that I think is completely
Alan Watts.
Alan, beautiful
class.
Man. He put forward an idea that I don't see enough people talking about. And he said that a thing is a unit of thought in the same way that like a gram is a unit of weight. A thing, kind of a word, is just a measurement for how close to an actual idea, an ideology you were discussing. So how good a word is determined by its utility, and its utility is by how accurately is describing kind of the intersubjective concept across the word. Left is an intersubjective concept as opposed to a subjective concept. It doesn't really matter what individuals think of themselves are, because the word's utility has got to do with groups of people. It's like we were talking earlier. It's that social, that groups of people. So how good a word is depending upon how accurately it describes all these different things. The most accurate way I've been able to come to in terms of left versus right, but I just want to preface this with, I actually completely and utterly side with Javi on this one, where left and right don't actually mean anything because they don't have solid, coherent ideas. Ultimately, you are kind of resting on a kind of an inferred, implied knowledge that you can't actually justify, where a lot of it is based off of what you were raised to believe and what society believes. It's why the Overton window describes the zeitgeist's position as opposed to the actual reality of a position. But the best descriptive utility I find that of left and right is the center is the perspective that hierarchies just are. The right is the belief that they exist and should be preserved. The left says they exist and should require the justification, otherwise they be dismantled. The further left you go, the more you believe that all hierarchies should justify themselves. The further right you go, the more you believe that all people, as they are stratified in the hierarchy, that justifies their position in the hierarchy. So that's how I determine whether you're left or right wing. It's whether or not you think people's position in their social hierarchies is inherent or external. That's my perspective of right wing. And this is where I come down to why I just can't consider Soc Dems to be leftists, because while they want to insulate and inoculate people from the harms of capitalism, they don't fundamentally kind of disagree with the idea that, well, the poor are poor. They just don't want them to be in poverty, but they don't seem to have an issue with the fact that the society is stratified the way it is. Like, the best example I can give is like that. For me, one of the differences between communists and social democrats is social democrats kind of say, well, if a billionaire can earn their billions and we can tax them, isn't that a good thing? Whereas a socialist would say, it doesn't matter what good comes out of a billionaire existing. They only got that wealth through exploiting the hierarchy. That's the difference as I see it.
I would agree with you to a certain extent, but I also think there's a lot of social democrats that just don't think that they are technically for a lot of the things that leftists are for, but they just don't think it's realistic. So they think that social democracy is kind of the only viable way forward and the only thing that is worth like striving for within the system. I think that there are a lot of social democrats that are not really pro-capitalist, not really centrist, but just like with capitalist realism and everything like that, they're just indoctrinated with the idea that there's no other way forward. So I don't know, I guess there's different types of social democrats in that sense, but yeah, I definitely see what you're saying.
I actually completely agree with that perspective, and it's why I think the onus is on those who are class conscious to try be able to help them out of that fog. Because like you brought up capitalist realism, which is a really good one in this regard, because like you said, they might fundamentally believe in all of these structures of kind of destroying class hierarchies, but they have no idea how to even begin to do it. And they're afraid of just deconstructing society and leaving nothing behind, because one of the things that I agree is the complete absence of hierarchy is a net negative. I do completely agree with that concept. Like, if like we're in the middle of a pandemic, if you walk into a hospital and you say, I'm sick, is there a doctor here? And everyone starts up and says, I'm a doctor. How do you sort out the chancers from the genuine person? You have to have some sort of a hierarchy in that regard. And the fear that I see from a lot of Soc Dems, like you described, is they're afraid of the total abolition of hierarchy and having no way to then actually structure these situations, which is a very real fear. And I completely agree. And it's a genuine issue. It's then our job to try offer solutions as to how do we, it's why I'm a transitionary socialist. I believe in the transitionary state. I don't think we can just achieve these things overnight because of that problem. I think society needs to be kind of like ease through that transition so that you can slowly amend the ideologies of the people in those societies. And I think that's what I'm getting at of what you're saying, where it's the issue is less that they're not leftists, rather they want to be leftists, but they just don't know how to be. And it's just occurred to me that I forgot one of the things that I want to say in terms of left and right. To be a leftist really comes down to, like Xavi said, it's to be a leftist, you just need to want to be a leftist. I would like people to then act on those beliefs and embody those beliefs. But because of neoliberalism, it is very difficult to embody a societal perspective when you are crushed with an individualist perspective. So I do think it is unreasonable to hold the idea that Soc Dems can't be leftist. I think the onus is there should be kind of a handshake in between of, we will help you figure out how to do it, and you need to not be afraid of the consequences of actually abolishing class.
Yeah, I think most people who are not on the left are very scared of the fake portrait of the left that the common sense of today has imposed on us, if you know what I mean. Like what is the left? We cannot articulate it ourselves, but our enemies have taken care of it already. So the left is being in the Soviet Union lining for bread in the middle of the winter and having no shoes. That's what they want people, to be scared of. And it's like, as you said, that when you painted this picture of people like envisioning no hierarchies at all and everything being in chaos and a mess, when most even anarchists, which are like the leftists who are mostly opposed of to hierarchies in the left, say abolish all the unnecessary hierarchies, doesn't mean that you're not gonna have a structured society. It's just that structure needs to be analyzed critically and say, this we need, this we don't need, and we get rid of the stuff that we don't need. But also, being a right winger is like or a leftist, I would say like a good test for it would be like envision the future. What do you want the future to be? You want the future to be like Star Trek? Or you want to be the future to be like The Handmaid's Tale or like Blade Runner? And that would, give you different, ideological things. It's like, do you want the end of scarcity? You want people not to go hungry anymore? Do you want everyone to have a roof over their head? And go like, and then right wingers will go like, but that's unrealistic. It's like that. There's no way to make it. No, and I would say like, you fucking right winger, you don't imagine that shit happening, but we have solutions collectively, and it would be like a lot of trial and error and trying to figure out things, as we go. But everything is better than this neo-feudal society, but which, by the way, big shout out to, but anyway, this neo-feudal society, that we have right now, which is going. What do you want the future to be? Like Star Trek or The Handmaid's Tale? And that's what it boils down to, and it's very abstract and fuck it, There's no universal recipe for anything, not even the left. These are like intellectual things. You wish them into being, and then you have to work around how to make it happen. And that's the tricky part. That's the difficult part.
That is the difficult part, yeah. And to be honest, I would take more of the perspective of what are people doing? What are people doing? What is the actual actions that people are engaged in? Rather than what flag they wave or what they say they are. Like, what are they actually doing? And we talked a little bit about Zahn, you mentioned this a moment ago, but like the sort of individualistic perspective versus more of a collective or holistic or social understanding of what left and right is. And one of the litmus tests I do like to give people, though, is I say, Cuba, good or bad? That'll usually sort people, straight away. It's like, oh, okay, you like Cuba? Okay, cool. And we're sort of on the same team here.
Who's sending doctors worldwide right now?
Exactly, yeah.
I fall perfectly flat on that litmus test then, because if somebody says Cuba, good or bad, I'd say I actually know nothing about it, so I don't feel comfortable saying yes or no.
Doctors, yep. That's all you need to know. Doctors worldwide. That's the important thing.
I've heard that they basically export doctors. They're that good at producing them.
Yeah, that's it exactly. They sort their own shit out, they get that under control, and then they send doctors all over the rest of the world. I mean, that's what you need to know about them.
Ironically, Ireland kind of juxtaposes this as Cuba versus the antithesis, where we export our nurses not because they're not good, but because we have a complete hiring ban because
that's right.
What is it? It's I'm not going to give a statistic because I don't know any. I'd just be making it up, but I think it's like every 5 years worth of graduates will have to emigrate to get work, and it's kind of like 1 in 5 years will end up going into the Irish system, and a huge part of it is because there's hiring freezes, and this is something that you'll intimately understand, Paul. Isn't it weird how miraculously and quickly our health service suddenly switched into being capable of supporting
That's
an epidemic
right.
despite it's
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
just how
Massive
quickly
healthcare
we
crisis, and now we're renting out like all of these private
yeah
institutions, and
it,
yep.
just to put this in perspective, people in the audience who may not be aware, we had a general election 2 months ago where like the main issue that kind of defined the election was our health services at capacity. How do we fix this? Because it had previously been referred to kind of like as a black hole of financial, it decimates any budget. Nobody has been able to fix it. We've had like 4 health ministers who have all overseen it getting worse. So it was kind of like just like the basic perception is our health service can't be fixed. How do we do this? And then within 3 weeks of the pandemic being declared, suddenly our hospitals, we have nobody on waiting lists and they're now operating perfectly at capacity. It begs belief and question. And the only thing I can think of is because we don't view it as a national priority and instead we're using it as kind of a source of a tax income. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, absolutely. You really need to appreciate how all of these things that people were saying were just not possible. They were just impossible. They couldn't be done just 2 months ago. Like there's no way we can sort this out. Just like that. It's just been proven bullshit. All the shit that the government's saying, we don't have the money. We don't have the money. We can't do these things. And this is internationally as well, these are things we can't do. Just suddenly, when we need to preserve capital, when we're trying to preserve neoliberalism, all of this money comes out of it's shaken off the magic money tree. And, here it is. We're okay, Now, I don't want to actually, I probably should push back on that. I don't want to sort of reinforce the narrative that there actually is a magic money tree, because as we all know, it's going to be us, it's going to be the proletariat who are going to need to foot the bill. We're going to be going into austerity after all of this, and we're going to be paying back this. So actually what we're paying for this now, we're already paying for with the money we pay through tax, and we're going to pay for it twice over. So over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So yeah, and we probably should also mention though, there's sort of misconceptions about the idea of
put a pin
nationalizing.
Put a pin in that, because you go on for super long and then I cannot answer to the stuff.
Sorry.
Don't worry. It's just a quick one. The how we're gonna pay for it and the austerity shouldn't be, and this is for everybody, the 3 of you and everybody in the chat. Shouldn't we push for the concept of leaving debt unpaid? Like having debt cancelled completely. Yep. Sorry, continue.
No, fuck yeah. Repudiate the debt. Repudiate the debt. That needs to be a phrase that gets out there. Repudiate the debt. Say no. We're not fucking paying this. And this is something that a number of parties pushed for when it came to like socializing the fucking with the bank bailout really after the 2007-2008 crisis in Ireland. Like, and I've talked about this a little bit before as well. Ireland is paying off 42% of the EU's banking debt, primarily from German privately owned banks, right? So the Irish people, every Irish person is paying nearly $8,000 for that. Whereas the average European is paying about €200. So we've got a really fucking unfair deal here. And we should be saying, no, we're fucking not paying this debt. We're just not fucking doing it. And we should be organizing around that. And that's something we should be organizing around. Once we're out of this sort of crisis mode and we're falling into that austerity trap, we need to be organizing around this idea that no, we're fucking not paying that. It's bollocks. It's someone else's debt. This is going into private pockets here. This isn't helping us out.
Yeah, we gotta let those banks fall for real. And they need to disappear, and they need to be replaced by public banks with low interest for people and smaller companies and cooperatives, and more. Sorry, but continue, man. I'm sorry to cut you.
No. I've ranted so much.
Because I've seen a lot of discussion in the United States at the moment about that Trump is trying to get everybody back to work, and if he does, immediately blanketly say, no, we are doing a national general strike to protect our health. I would suggest something completely identical, where if tomorrow your local government rolls out and says, okay, to pay for all of the social services we're introducing because of Corona, we're introducing kind of a citizen debt program, I would say the next day say, no, we're not turning up for work. No, appeal to all
Yes.
employers, basically shut the country down, because and I think this is the key element. This is where politics is completely capitalist politics is completely incapable of handling any of this situation. You can't make profit from a fucking natural disaster. It has nothing to do with economics. The world has shut down not because there's an abundance of surplus or because there's some sort of a fucking price discrepancy where people are trying to marginalize off of these ideas. The world is shut down because we have a highly infectious virus that is targeting people's respiratory systems that we don't have a fucking vaccine for. The economy has collapsed not because capitalism is or isn't working. It's collapsed because it's too dangerous for us to work. Even in a socialist society, the economy would have fucking collapsed. And that's one of the points that I really want to make out to people, is that we are experiencing the raw ferocity of being alive on Earth in an unforgiving nihilistic universe. This is so much bigger than politics and economics. And it's why I'm really fucking annoyed to hear people say, oh, sure, we'll just increase the taxes to pay for all this. No, it should be completely forgiven. It should be written off. There should be no debt. There should be no austerity. This is the world reminding humans that we don't fucking matter when it comes to nature. So I don't understand why we have to pay for that. How about we all just come together and say, let's get through this?
Fucking yeah, absolutely. And we literally can't pay for this. Global debt is over 250,000 US dollars. You know, like, we fucking can't pay that off. We just can't. Literally, like, there's nothing we can do. There's no money there, you know.
And you shouldn't, which is like the trick. That's predatory, and predatory loans are supposed to be illegal.
Yeah.
You know, and the same with the IMF and the World Bank and all those institutions. They're not respectable. They're crooks. They need to go down. Period.
Yeah. One of the things that really annoys me at the World Bank is they keep very slightly adjusting what they consider the poverty line so as to argue about how capitalism is consistently rising more and more people out of poverty, when really what they're doing is they're arguing that there's somebody in a slum in India who can afford 1 tin of beans every year and suddenly they're not in poverty anymore.
Yeah. That's they're
Move the
cooking their
goalposts,
numbers. Yeah. They're cooking the stats. Fuck that. Fuck those people. They're crooks.
Yeah. Here, I just got to run to the bathroom, maybe 2 seconds.
No worries.
Enjoy. This is cool. This is a good conversation. I'm enjoying this. Ranting.
I'm really enjoying listening to you guys. Sorry that I'm not contributing much.
Sorry
Part of
for
it.
talking so much shite and not letting you,
No.
come in as much.
You're a little bit
I'd like
under
to go
the
to
weather.
the toilet as well.
Yeah, go for
We're
it.
taking a
We
break.
don't see you go to the toilet, you know. That's a tactical advantage. I could have gone to the toilet like twice already.
It's like that thing what you do like when you're like making YouTube videos where like, like from the top up you might be wearing like a nice shirt or something, you might put on like a nice and then like from the waist down you could be completely naked.
I'm not gonna say I am, but I could be.
Are you completely naked? Is that my leg there? No, I'm wearing shorts. I'm not completely naked.
I'm wearing
But,
the ugliest PJs ever, but
yeah,
they're warm. Fuck it. We're on
Fuck it, they're
lockdown.
warm. We're on lockdown. And fuck it. We're chilling. It's a Socialist Sunday stream. This is
We're letting
informal.
ourselves go.
I've been doing that for a while now. Yeah.
Lovely. I'm back. Did I miss anything?
No worries.
How are you?
I'm gonna have
We're just
Heffy.
talking shit about being naked.
I'm just
Heffy
going to
tell
refill
us.
my water. I'll be 2 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, didn't you? Weren't you wearing? I think in the video before last, I could just see your knee, and it looked like you had like pajamas on. It was just like.
Oh,
one of
that's
your knees.
right. Yeah, I had. You're very perceptive to have noticed my pajamas. Yeah, blue. They were like a blue pair of pajama bottoms that I was wearing in the last. I'm not sure if it was the last call or something, but yeah, this knee here would have been covered in a blue kind of tartany kind of.
Yeah, I think it was one of your videos.
Was it? No, really? In one of my videos, you can see my pajamas.
I thought it was one of your videos.
I thought it was. Oh shit! I gotta go back to my videos now. Tactically
Well,
edit a
sorry,
few
I
videos.
mean, it's totally fine. Like,
It's like that hat when Happy did the news report in his video and he stands up and walks away. It's bare arse.
oh wait, is that
full
your
moon.
latest video, Javi? I haven't seen it.
Oh no, that was an older video. That was an older video that Javi did. I think Javi's in the bathroom now. Oh, but you do get to see Javi.
Naked.
Yeah, you do get to see Javi naked in his most recent one, which is you know, we didn't get the full frontal though, so you know. A little bit disappointed.
Not good enough.
A phrase I never thought I'd hear. Very quickly on the topic of naked YouTubers, I still think my favorite artistic use of kind of nudity in a video would be H Bomber Guy's kind of the the term, kind of the naked emerging from the picture at the end of his Control Alt Delete video.
That was fantastic.
Like that literally is a case where if he was in any way clothed, it wouldn't have made sense. That's where the nudity actually was incredibly artistic.
I can't speak so much about nudity considering my latest video and the one I did about the media where I show my ass. So, I don't know.
It's to kind of collect and wrap up the ideas we're talking about there. To saying to that, when I say that I don't consider SocDems left, I'm not precluding them from could be. They have a crap ton of potential, because the way I describe it is that they're economically undecided but socially left wing, and I want to stress they're undecided. It's they see capitalism the same way Marx did, in terms of they recognize its raw potential for production, and they question why that production isn't being turned towards the people themselves. However, I don't think they've really internalized the idea about how capitalism views the working class. And I'll very quickly go through just a very brief bit of Marxism from Das Kapital for the audience if they're not entirely sure.
Yes.
One of the things that's important, and I think this is one of the elements where SocDems are just, I don't want to say ignorant, but a lot of us are, because we haven't looked into these things. I think they're just unaware of this, is that kind of it's the relationship between capital and money, in that people sell their labor so that they can get access to money to buy commodities, whereas a capitalist will buy your labor because you are a commodity, so that they will then produce commodities for it to be money. Within capitalism, all of the essential services you need to a capitalist is completely disposable, and it's essentially disposable change. You have farmers in, I think it's Denmark or the Netherlands, where they have basically gigantic piles of potatoes right now, where all the potato is to them is a potential profit, much in the same way that when you're at work, you view your time as a paycheck. It's all got to do with, these are the antagonisms within the structures where they can't be resolved. A capitalist cannot respect you as a thing, as a person, because all you are to them is capital. They are purchasing you so that they can then use you to produce a commodity, and you have to sell yourself so that you can then purchase those commodities. I don't think SocDems really understand that. There's no way you can engage in this system and come out of it as an agent capable of actually achieving your rights, because if you don't sell your labor, if you don't dehumanize and objectify yourself to being capital, you starve and you die. And I think SocDems need to really understand this interchange between how people are considered things within capitalism. I think once they really understand that, they then kind of realize declawing the tiger still doesn't protect the child. It just protects the visible aesthetics of the scratches on the child. And that's the part that I really want to get across, where it's SocDems, their hearts are completely in the right place. They can't see the harm being done because their ideology is uniquely designed to obscure the harm.
Confirmed.
Oh yeah, they can be left if they want to be. They just have to kind of, like, this might sound harsh, but they need to honestly and critically engage with their values to ask themselves, can you be for the people if you think like the basic litmus tests is, if you think landlords are justified, you have to ask whether your priorities are with the tenant or the landlord. Soc Dems, I think, are just completely conflicted on this one. They don't know what to do. And to me, that makes them much better from fascists or kind of your right-wing liberal, because at least they're saying, no, landlords, they offer services. The Soc Dem honestly doesn't know. They see the benefits, they see the negatives, they see all the harm, they see people being evicted, and they just don't know how to fix it. And that's the huge insight Kathrin's offered to this, where it's they don't know how to fix it, and that's the point. We need to help them understand how and provide the opportunities, because like, I believe in people. I think if you show them the way, they will leave social democracy behind and come to democratic socialism.
Yeah, and also I think a lot of democratic socialists don't recognize the fact that even if conditions get so much better within your country, it normally is as a result of more outsourcing of exploitation and suffering of people in developing or colonized countries. So it often correlates with like a greater level of suffering abroad. And I think a lot of social democrats don't really see the links between how that works, I guess.
That's such a good point, and I think it really stems from sort of a lack of understanding of how imperialism works on the global scale. And really, I think we can sort of dive back into sort of Lenin's definition of imperialism, rather than just the sort of popular definition of it just being, sort of extending your influence beyond the borders of a certain nation, because basically every nation could be imperialist by that definition. Or the classical.
I got on that one not so long ago.
Yeah, this is a very common one that people get a little bit confused with, and often they'll just say, well, settler colonialism, or colonialism is imperialism, and we have these sort of old-fashioned notions of imperialism, whereas we don't really understand imperialism from the Marxist perspective, and we don't really understand how it relates to the export of capital abroad, rather than just the exportation of commodities abroad. You're not just selling your products abroad, you're actually moving production abroad over to different places. The US is outsourcing all of its production to all of these different parts of the world. And so even if you do have Bernie Sanders and he brings in social democracy in the US, you're still behaving in this extraordinarily imperialistic way. You're still subjugating all these countries. You're still participating in the exploitation of global capitalism, and so it's a little bit myopic. And I think that people would do with just, to be honest, I think everybody could benefit from just getting a bit more of a firmer grasp on what imperialism is on the global scale. You end up just being this sort of left-wing imperialist. It's left imperialism. I think that might be a good way of describing.
Someone I want to mention who made this abundantly clear to me, and I can't unlearn this now, is a YouTuber called Hakim. He's an Iraqi Marxist-Leninist he's phenomenal.
Amazing.
Absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, amazing.
And the way he explained it to me is that this is fundamentally, this is actually what made me think Soc Dems weren't left. It's because let's fairly analyze what Soc Dems are trying to do. And I mean fairly, because I'm not actually trying to malign them here. They want to remove kind of their domestic or their local proletariat, and they want to insulate and inoculate them from the harms of capitalism. So they want to kind of raise them out of that kind of proletariat status, but not necessarily become petty bourgeois, because they're not totally immune from the effects of having to sell their labor. However, one of the problems is how they plan to do this is through kind of expropriating the wealth from the global south. They're planning on using all of the kind of the money generated through exploiting kind of like farmers in the global south, kind of all of that different labor. They're going to use all of those surplus profits to placate the capitalists in their countries, and then through that placation say to them, hey, do you fancy giving us an extra 1% of tax, and then using that tax to lift their local proletariat out of poverty. So the term I have I don't know if there's an actual term for it, but I like to describe it as kind of like it's a global kind of neo-proletariat, where, again, I don't want to call them a global petty bourgeoisie, because they're still not kind of inoculated from the problems of having to sell their labor. However, it's artificially reintroducing a kind of an oppression hierarchy, because one of the classic examples is like that the second Iraq war. I think we largely understand that it was the United States kind of saying, "Hey, we don't really like these rates of oil. We think you've weapons of mass destruction, so let's have a look for them. Oh, while we're here, isn't it handy that we introduce this dictator and get more favorable oil prices?" That is specifically oppressing that country so that their local populace can benefit from that exchange. It's I think of it from a perspective of the reason this is so effective in neoliberalism is because if you dissociate the individual from society, you only really see your benefit, and the individual certainly benefits under social democracy. However, you then don't see how harmful this is. Because it's the best way I can put it, and this is tragic when you really think about it. It's when I was having a conversation with Hakeem. He was telling me about the 2008 global financial crash. And he said that in Iraq, we didn't really feel it because we didn't have anything to lose. We were that worse off because of how everything was being taken out of the country. Our banks didn't collapse. Our industry didn't collapse because none of it actually benefited us. It was all being taken out of the country. So that's the point that I'm trying to get across. Social democracy, it's not really liberating you. It's liberating you at the expense of somebody else. And to me, socialism has to be international.
Yeah, it really plays on these sort of the ideals of the labor aristocracy, and I think that might be the sort of term you were talking about there. It's like a global labor aristocracy. The people who are at the highest, the managerial class and stuff like that, they're still the workers, and they're still actually part of the proletariat, but they see themselves, they identify themselves with the bourgeoisie. They see themselves as being part of the ruling class, and so they see themselves as superior. And this actually kind of ties back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier when it comes to like nationalism and stuff like that. You know,
I was about to,
doesn't it? I mean, like, because if you're only looking inward and saying, "Oh well, look, we can have this social democracy and that's brilliant," you end up with this sort of you do end up getting into this almost sort of fascistic territory where you're saying us first, and we don't care if this fucking destroys all of these countries in the global south. We don't give a shit, you know, because we're putting our nation first in that. Whereas if your nationalism is infused with like an international solidarity thing, you know, like if you're engaged in solidarity efforts with the people of Palestine or in other liberation struggles all over the world, then I think you're probably going to be less likely to fall into that. And that's something that we've struggled with in terms of the Irish national liberation question as well. So yeah, really, really good points.
Also, there's like a practical thing to this. It's like every time you start a national socialist project, you have all the other countries, you know, raining on you. You have the US policing you and invading you, and you have a Chile on your hands. You have let's talk about more recent examples like Bolivia, which were not really socialist. They were just protecting the indigenous communities from the horrible side effects of capitalism, and still, you know, they put a coup d'etat on them. You know, and it's been happening over and over and over. And that's why Cuba, for instance, has so many problems, because their economy is in shambles because of the blockade of the United States. You know, so communism needs to be international, you know, and social democracy gets a little bit in the way, in a way that it does address the symptoms, but it doesn't address the cause. But then again,
great way of summing it up. Yeah,
you know, like if there's also a big distinction that I've been wanting to say that just didn't have the moment to say it. But there's this big distinction between the base of these movements, like say the social democratic voter, the social democratic person who says, I'm a social democrat because I think it's going to be better for everybody, yada, 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 and their leadership. Their leadership, you know, the liberal leadership is not the same as the liberal average voter. So the liberal or social democratic person, average voter, wants to do good for people, wants to alleviate the worst consequences of capitalism. The leadership don't give a fuck. They aim to make business. So it's different, you know. Fuck the leadership, but support the people. Sorry, Kathrin, that talked a little bit over you, and I didn't mean to. Sorry.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that what all of you have said is something like is really important about the fact that actually I think a message that we on the left could be spreading more is probably a lot to do with the fact of what you were talking about with the IMF and the World Bank and um, how we go into developing countries and we force them to adopt these impose these conditionalities onto them and then force them to basically fund us so much money, and that all through their debts that we impose on them, that we give them loans and then they have to pay them back, and then the amount of money that comes out of the colonized countries is so much more than they get in aid and so much more than they get in income in general, and this leads to their continued colonial state, a state still in, it's like a new form of colonialism, and then all the unequal trade and everything like that, that means that the imported finished goods are more expensive than the exports that they export outside of their countries, and then also resource extraction and stuff like that. I sort of feel like maybe we could be doing more to talk about these things, because I don't think that anyone at all could learn about these things and then not recognize that these things are inherently unjust. And I think, yeah, I don't know, it's just a thought that because the average person that I speak to doesn't really know what the IMF and the World Bank does and what it is, and across, and the harm that it continues to do across the globe, and doesn't really understand unequal exchange and stuff like that. And the other thing that I wanted to say as well is I think another way in which we can get social democrats to recognize that social democracy isn't enough is by talking about climate change. And I think, well, with conservatives as well, I suppose, and liberals, because I just don't see how anyone can argue that social democracy would be enough to prevent climate catastrophe. And I think that climate change is one of the best ways, I think, to be able to help people come to the left, because I think most people recognize that the planet is dying and that climate change is real, and that and once you get people to recognize that capitalism fundamentally needs to continuously extract resources and generate so much waste and so much carbon emissions, etc., and that is a fundamental part of the capitalist system.
Consume everything until there's nothing left, right?
Yeah, then I don't think that there's any way that you can still be a social democrat once you recognize that is the reality. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but
no, you have a big blunt weapon towards that argument that it's fantastic. Let's definitely support that. That's fantastic.
And Corona accidentally has exposed the idea that the international community can cooperate on a global threat. So before, one of the common things we often hear is this is just too big. We can't address this as an international community because we're all too nationalistically focused inwards. Whereas one of the big things we've seen is international cooperation and actually kind of appealing to, like, the World Health Organization is kind of like an independent external global body that most national governments are now looking towards to say, let's coordinate and try stemming this fucking thing.
Also geopolitically, like, it's shown which countries or which governments were willing to cooperate with others and send help, and which other countries are very willing to send military to invade and destroy, but not so willing to send any help or material resources to other countries. So there's that.
It's like
America,
fuck yeah!
There was a Charlie Kirk tweet that I'll very quickly see if I can find it and just read it out, because it's so perfectly summed up the American imperialist perspective of this whole thing. Here we go. On the 3rd of December, He said this media hysteria over the China virus is irresponsible, and then basically listed lots of different flus that had bigger deaths than the COVID-19, and basically argued that this is media manipulation. And then 2 days ago, he said, question, why didn't the kind of national aid director in January say that this is not a major threat for the people in the US and that it was not something we should be worried about? And then basically arguing that our medical leaders are incompetent and shouldn't be trusted because they're lying to us and kind of underselling the problem. And it's all about kind of I want to close that out by pulling in that there's a line in John Paul Sartre's essay about kind of anti-Semitism, about how the right views anti-Semitism, the Jew, where he was basically arguing that to a fascist, words are just playthings, that they do not inherently hold to being things that have value. They will say what they say for its effect rather for its descriptive utility. Like I said earlier, when I was talking about that things are a unit of thought, and I tried to have the most accurate word possible, fascists are the complete opposite and actually take on a very destructive postmodernist perspective on the utility of language, where what they want to do is they want to use the words that appeal to the emotion within you, where the word serves no descriptive purpose. It's just to make you angry. And right there was a perfect example of fascistic use of rhetoric.
Boom. Drop that mic.
There you go. There you go.
It's not about what's true, it's about what's effective.
Yes, this is very true. They would weaponize language, and they would,
Oh yeah.
we're trying to the difference is we're trying to use language to communicate solutions to help people and societies grow, and they're weaponizing language because it feels like in our societies as of right now, feels like downhill, like easy to be an asshole in general. Feels like the easy way,
Yeah.
If you're an asshole, you're gonna succeed in society. You're gonna become like a Wall Street trader, or you're gonna become one of those examples of quote unquote success. And it feels like the conditions are set in a very fucked up way. That being an asshole is very rewarded, and this thing with words is like being an asshole with the language. It's basically weaponizing the language to fuck people up, to do damage because it's fun, because edgelord, shitty 14-year-old has learned that 4chan is fun. Fuck that shit. For real, sorry, but fuck that shit.
And this ties into why it's so important as leftists, and especially as class-conscious leftists, how we can tailor our rhetoric to actually reach the people where they are, and about the use of kind of alienating language. And I feel the actual perfect struggle in this conversation is just the use of ableist terms, in terms of how do we reach people where they are while not removing kind of it can be fun to basically argue that somebody is so incapable at using their reasoning faculties that they come to the wrong answer. However, there's a kind of a list of words that just don't actually get that across, and instead malign and impugn somebody else. And it's all about kind of the correct use of language and kind of how not to alienate people through our language. And this applies both in offensive language and kind of obscuring language, because like I could walk into a room and talk about kind of like oh, hello, kind proletariat. Have you heard about dialectical materialism, about the kind of the exchange value of how your labor is viewed purely as an exchange commodity towards the alienation from your work? Have you ever thought about unionizing? Or I could just walk up and say, work sucks, doesn't it? Have you ever thought about getting together with your work colleagues and forming a union? I've said the same thing in two different ways, and the latter people will listen to. The former will probably get me strange looks at an academic press conference.
Fucking hell. I wish they would listen to that second one. Fucking hell. Yeah,
I mean, we need to have all
even
levels. We need to have all levels. A little bit for nerds, a little bit for working class people, And
But you can bring people up, I mean, it's not. It's like. We don't want to essentialize people and saying that like no, this group of people will never understand these words. I think that
I'm very dumb. Sorry.
Well, you're just a very humble person. You act like you are, but no, you get it. There sometimes is a case of you do need to sort of quickly just check words, just briefly revise words or reformulate things when you're talking about certain ideas. We need to be clear when we say working class. What do we mean? Like, what does that actually mean? And sometimes it can be useful to say the working class, the proletariat, and then when you say things like like the bourgeoisie, say, okay, bourgeoisie, ruling class, rather, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the distinction between the working class and the ruling class, rather than like the working class, the lower middle class, the upper middle class, the lower upper class, like all of the, because that's a very common, that's basically, like if you say to someone like your working class or whatever like that, they have very different notions of what that is to necessarily to how we on the left might understand what that is, and so those are things like materialism. We talked about imperialism. These are all things which, in our little cliques have a different meaning, and they're related. They're very much related to the popular words, but there's a little bit more. We dive into them a little bit more. So there kind of is an aspect of needing to take people by the hand and bring them into that, without alienating them, without being like, oh, the dialectics here is, like, there's no, if you look at the antithesis here, this is going to lead to the synthesis of the blah, blah, blah. That's not really going to win anybody over, and at least not at the start anyway. You can bring people up, you can get them there, but it's there's a lot of education. That's why we say educate, agitate, and organize. It's not just organize or agitate. We do need to educate and meet people where they are first, and then introduce them to maybe the headier stuff, and because even if you try to say someone, like, oh, we like to take a materialist perspective, we like to understand the world from a materialist perspective, they'll be like, oh, what are you talking about, man? You just want to buy shit and have fancy cars, bro. And you're just like, wait, what? No, that's not. No. But that's the popular understanding of the term materialism, so is it useful for us to be like, oh, well, we're a party that takes the materialist analysis and we try to push forward?
I think it's a very common thing, of the online people, is the temptation of looking smart.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It gives you a little bit of endorphin boost there, like, oh, I look so smart. I scored.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was watching The Messiah Complex on Netflix by Russell Brand, and his way of, I don't know, maybe some people say he's problematic, but I think, like, from what I've seen of him, I think he's really great. And and I think that one of the things that I loved so much about The Messiah Complex is just how well he's able to get across so many leftist type of ideas in such a funny way, and sort of being really like sexy at the same time, and just like I don't know, just really enjoyable to listen to, and making it not so depressing and not so, I don't know, I would really recommend it to a lot of people, just to, because it's given me a lot of food for thought in terms of how I want to get across messages, and also the fact that you can make things really kind of simple and also just really funny at the same time. And I mean, okay, he's a comedian, he's like an expert at this kind of stuff, but so it's probably unrealistic that we'll all be able to do things the way he does it. But just the fact that, I don't know, he's able to get to such a big audience with such and really make you think about concepts without making it so complex or boring or just really depressing to listen to. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's but there's an audience for everybody and for everything. So,
And I do think Russell is actually a really good example in this situation, because it just happens to tie into an essay Mark Fisher wrote, where he uses Russell in the exact same context of somebody who is appealing to the masses, but because he's not doing it in what is a quote unquote acceptable way, it's deemed to be kind of irrelevant and not worth it. And the reason I bring it up is because it harkens, and it's similar to the Social Democrat conversation in terms of how do we critique somebody's problematic nature without excluding them from the conversation?
Yeah.
Because like we were saying, he's left from what I gather. Like from what I gather, he's basically a communist in a situation where he
Calls
can't
himself
be a
socialist, yeah.
communist. Yeah, it's because he's bourgeois. He can't be what he wants to be, and he recognizes he's at the mercy of the system. I'd argue he's perfectly aware of ideology in the situation. So how do we, in good faith, incorporate him while not kind of just arguing away his problematic behavior? And this is something we need to get so much better at, because I'm going to paraphrase Lenin, and this forever changed the way I view the working class. And it was, I want the working class as they are, not as they could be, because they can't wait to be perfect. They need to be liberated now.
Boom.
Yeah.
Yes.
Boom.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, and it reminds me of a quote as well by Russell. I don't know it exactly, but it was like, I complained about inequality and poverty when I was poor, and they called me biased and bitter. And then I complain about it when I'm rich, and they call me a hypocrite. I'm starting to think that they don't want us to talk about inequality. And I thought that that's quite...
Yeah, it's so good.
Like
100%, yeah.
One
of the things I personally love about Russell is that whenever he's on kind of like a popular podcast with people who are above him in the social ranking, he spends the whole time bringing them down and making them a regular person. Like if you ever watch him having interviews with kind of political correspondents, he's constantly basically saying to him, what you do is important to the people who watch you, but you don't owe the ruling class anything. So stop pretending that you're more important than you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish we could have him on.
I think he's probably watching there. I think I saw him in the chat there. Was that? All right, Russell, we've
Russ.
decided that you can come on if you want. We'll put you. We've got a busy schedule.
We got Russ, we got
Yannis,
Yannis, we got...
It might be worth trying. Why not?
Fuck it, why not?
Message him.
People who I'd love
Jordan
to
Peterson
have
and all that.
on would be just Yannis Varoufakis. I would love to have Yannis Varoufakis on. I would love to have Talib Kweli on, or Chuck D. That'd be awesome. But I would be like a fanboy. You'd have to stop me. Somebody else would have to host, because I would be here, screaming. And I don't know. Yeah, like Professor
I wonder
Wolf.
if we could get Maduro on. That'd be cool.
What? Maduro?
Maduro.
Yeah, I would have him on. Aló, presidente. Well, it has to be in Spanish, right?
He slid into
He doesn't speak
Yeah, well, he
English.
slid into my DMs there recently.
I'm just going to run to the bathroom in 2 seconds.
Yeah, no worries.
You're right.
I would have to go like, okay, where's my
Give me
pay?
Kim Jong-un.
Nicolas, come on, my check is overdue.
What's up? Get Soros on.
It's either you or Soros, but somebody's got to pay me shit. This baby's gonna.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm gonna
real
have to
life.
go very soon.
I think we're gonna have to wrap it up. Yeah, we've been doing this now for a
We're
couple
gonna
hours.
wait for Zahn Zee to come back from the loo and wrap it up. In the
Yeah, I
meantime,
think that's a good idea.
I'm gonna sing you a song if that's cool, because we would
Please.
love to. Does
Yeah.
Lula speak English? I would love to have Lula on.
Lula.
Yeah.
I don't think Lula speaks English, but I'd love. Yeah, he uses a few words, but I don't think he. We can do a little bit of Portuguese. We can get Marcos from This Mexicano Esquerda on, and he can help us out. He can be like the translator for us.
We could have Julia interviewing Lula, and just.
That's
record
great.
it.
Yeah.
And
Oh
just
yeah.
record it.
That'd be great. She'd be great at that. Yeah. Lula's been saying some great stuff actually recently. Lula. This wasn't reported in the English-speaking press, but Lula actually came out recently in defense of Maduro and Evo Morales and everything. So I think Lula might be sort of moving leftwards at the moment from that social democratic position into more of a democratic socialist position rather than he was before. He's still very democracy, but
I'm back, Chip.
how are you?
I'm doing well. I heard democracy in there. What are we talking about?
Lula was talking. Lula, the former president of Brazil, president of the Workers' Party, brought tens of millions of people out of poverty, loads of people from the working class into the middle class. Did amazing things in Brazil. Really, the sort of thing that you'd really only expect to see through a socialist revolution. He did that through the fucking parliamentary democracy system. that they have in Brazil. Of course, it had the same problems, the same trappings of all social democracy, where you get progress for about 8 years, and then it gets rolled back when you get a fucking fascist government. Now, as they say, they've cut education. They're just rolling back everything, all of the progress that he made. They're sliding into a fascist dictatorship now. Meanwhile, Maduro, for all people want to say, oh, he's a dictator, oh, he's this, he's that, he's awful. It's like, yeah, well, he's still fucking in charge. So, you know, like, where is he now? Yeah. I don't know. It kind of made me really rethink like the fetishization of democracy that we have, because, you know, Lula was fantastic, Evo Morales was fantastic, and they sort of, I feel like one of their downfalls was that they respected democracy too much. You know, they gave too much power to bourgeoisie to manipulate people via the media and turn people against them. And yeah, so I don't know. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to get cancelled for saying that.
But I completely agree with you with the concept of the fetishization of democracy. However, I just want to kind of push back into, I disagree with the idea that fetishizing something means you respect it too much. Mainly from the respect of when you fetishize something, what you do is you abstract it from what it is into being its ideal. You end up with a lot of people where, like, it's like anyone who argues that the United States is a democracy is fetishizing democracy, because what they're doing is they're partaking in the election of an oligarchy. We kind of have the same thing in Ireland. We partake in the election of an oligarchy. That's what representative democracy is. You democratically elect the ruling class.
I made a video about that. I hear you.
Yeah. Because one of the, like, I personally want to escape the term dictatorship of the proletariat, because democracy
worst PR ever.
It's like a democracy is the dictatorship of the proletariat. So we can escape that word and go into democracy, because like I'm a huge champion of direct democracy. Like one of the things, like I need to find the kind of the correct way of interpreting this, but I like the concept of federations. I like a kind of like isolating individual power structures. Like when we eventually get a united Ireland, I would want some sort of a provincial system where you have 4 federal political unions, where you have then a national structure that just deals with foreign policy, but it doesn't actually set the regional agendas. Because one of the things that's unique about Ireland is that our provincial divisions are not antagonistic. It's weird. Like for instance, like I'm in Munster, Paul's in Leinster.
That's right.
Our division is entirely competitive, but it's mutual competition where we actually want each other. Like I'm a massive rugby fan. My partner's a Leinster fan. I'm always bitching and moaning because we never fucking beat you, and when we do, it's because you don't turn up. So it never feels like a win. However, and I've always said this one, that rivalry makes the sport what it is, and at a national level, I think something like that could work really well. It's like, ironically, like it'll sound funny when I say this, but you'll get exactly what I mean. Our largest sporting body is the GAA, which is inherently political from its fucking founding. It was originally founded as kind of like a way of hiding military drills by our socialist militants.
Yep,
the GAA accidentally organizes itself as kind of like a national government where they kind of distribute their wealth across the counties. It actually is a model you can look towards, and I would like some sort of like a federalist system. It's why I kind of like the way Germany works, where the national government has to basically seek the approval of its federal kind of governments. It's why I like federalism, and I think an international federalism could work. It's why I'm not... I'm anti-EU, but I don't want to see the EU be removed or destroyed. I want to see it being reformed, because I think it's the first experiment in an international system that we've seen that it is imperial, but it's not by definition and by designation imperial. It's trying to be democratic. It's failing miserably, but it's the first time we've seen some sort of an international political union that's trying to respect the agency of its member unions. And I don't think we should throw that away. I think we should try to, if similar to modern socialists with the USSR or with China as it is, rather than trying to emulate it, see what worked, see what didn't, and try to have a go at it in a contemporary setting. That's why I say a democracy is the dictatorship of the proletariat, because democracy is when the people get their say and the vested interests can't buy you off.
Yeah, dictatorship of the proletariat is a very bad selling term. Like, it means that only workers vote. That doesn't mean anything, you know. Only workers vote and are elected. So the bourgeoisie, would be, if it exists or until its extinction, they would be just left out of the power sphere, which is not a bad thing. But if you call it dictatorship, you got your marketing already fucked up.
Yeah. And one of the things that I
Absolutely.
sometimes worry about is that and again, it's the problem of kind of being trapped in kind of the mud of the murky situation of where do we go from here. One of the things I worry about a transition state in terms of dictatorship of the proletariat is it's kind of inherently already admitted it's going to fail because its political institution is to prioritize class when the point of the politics is to eliminate class. The goal of a dictatorship of the proletariat is to actually remove that concept from society. So the point of that dictatorship is to eventually undermine its dictatorship and lead to something else. Otherwise, to me, that was ultimately the flaw of the Soviet Union as I saw it, where it suddenly realized, wait, we have no idea how to do this. And I think we're still kind of reeling with the effects of this, where we're not sure how to transition into a different class structure.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not like the bourgeoisie are gonna be killed or guillotined or anything. They're just gonna have to get a job. I mean, not all of them.
No, you're right.
They're just gonna
that-
need to have they're just gonna need to get a job, and join a cooperative like
just
everybody
work it
else.
Totally.
One of the things I very quickly just want to raise is because I always inherently get uncomfortable at guillotine memes, because when I looked into the French Revolution and the French the Reign of Terror, the guillotine killed way more ordinary French citizens before it ever touched the neck of an aristocrat. So I think people fetishize the guillotine as an anti-hierarch weapon, when in reality it was just a weapon of terror. The guillotine is very similar to the modern gun, where you get a lot of people fetishizing the idea of gun ownership so that they can resist power structures. However, none of that matters if you don't actually create a society that won't turn their guns against each other.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to get a gun, join the SRA. Hopefully you have an SRA in your country.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have one here, but we do have an IRA, which probably teach you the same things. But anyway, no, we don't have that anymore. Not really. Anyway, Javi, you were going to wrap things up.
Yeah, I think we've been gone for a little bit over an hour and a half. So I think we're gonna wrap it up, good people. So Zahn Zee, if you have some like final thoughts, or tell people, plug
things you want to plug.
Yes, go for it.
In terms of plugging, you can catch me on YouTube. I'm streaming on Twitch at the moment. I want to get more active on Twitch because it's basically how I do my content is I just rant into a camera, so I might as well do it live. If you just Google me, ZAHNZEE, you should find me pretty easily. If not, I'll be posting a link to my podcast, Left Thinking, in the chat afterwards, where I chat to just lots of people from different flavors of leftists, Marxist-Leninist, Maoists, Marxist-Leninists, anarchists, SocDems. I had a conversation with Faraday Speaks, where it's basically about common ground and about learning how that we can better our rhetoric through discussing with the people we're trying to reach, as opposed to speaking to the choir. Because I guess in terms of what I'm doing, I'm just trying to find the best way of bringing people to class consciousness, because I believe in, there might be a theory somewhere about critical mass, where if you get enough people to understand the position they're in, the system can't support that amount of awareness and it'll collapse. That's kind of where I'm going with this. I believe in people power. I believe in the kind of the innate goodness of people, where I think that if you're aware of the oppressive structures that you're living within and under, you will want to systematically destruct them and eradicate them. And big personal shout out, trans rights. Fuck yeah. I consider it like one of like the civil rights movements of our time, and I think perfectly describes the distinction between reactionary and progressive, of whether or not you believe in emancipating people or keeping them in their place. Thank you. Thanks a million for having me on. I absolutely loved it.
It's been a great pleasure to have you on. It was fantastic. It's always great to talk to you. And as we were talking off camera before, so glad to see your face. We've always talked without, minus the camera. So yeah, we're a little bit more friends now.
Yeah, exactly. We actually had a nightmare getting that podcast off the ground because for whatever reason, the connection was just horrible. So what we did is I recorded my audio, Javi recorded his, and then I'm editing it together in the background now and getting them to line up. But we got it in the end. We got it.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. I can't remember if it's due up this weekend or next.
Couple of weekends.
No, I think
from
it's due
now.
the 25th
Yeah.
actually. There you go.
Couple of
Yeah.
weekends.
My next podcast is with Actual Context. Just shout out to himself. Go watch his videos. He does a really good series analyzing the role of the police within capitalist structures, using Marvel as the Punisher to kind of highlight what it is. So I recommend you go check that out.
Fantastic.
Yes, absolutely.
Anything you good
All right,
people
gang.
would like to say before we go?
Read Lenin. That's what I'm gonna say. Sorry, just imperialism conversation to everybody. Read Lenin. Very important.
What I feel to people is
Thank
while
you so
it's-
much,
Everyone.
Zahn, for coming on. It's so interesting talking to you. Well, listening to you.
thanks. a
Yeah,
million.
thanks so much for coming on, Zahn. It was really, really great. And sorry we haven't got to do our podcast yet. We will do that. But
We will get it. Yeah.
Okay.
What?
Pain
Yeah.
in the arse. I'm
were
such a
saying.
pain in the arse. Sorry.
Are we still live or?
I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
alive,
yeah.
right?
We're still live.
Lovely. What I leave everybody else on is that my request to everybody is, while it's intoxicating to follow national news and politics, get involved in your local domestic unions, get involved in grassroots organizing, knock on your neighbor's door. Maybe not now during the COVID, but find out how they're doing. Set up a neighborhood kind of like a WhatsApp group. Get involved in the people around you. Strengthen your communities. Look out for each other and get involved in local politics. If you believe in leftist aims and you want to achieve socialism, it'll come from the ground up, not the top down. While it's intoxicating to look at national politics, that's not where the change will come. It'll come from the bottom up.
And if you're disabled or if you have depression or problems and stuff like that, you're welcome to hang out with us and encourage other people online too, because you know, it's not self. But if you're able, if you can manage to do it, please.
Important distinction.
Okay, let's wrap it up with the
Absolutely.
song, because we got to wrap it up with the song, because I just had this
Only way
idea
to
of
do it.
wrapping it up. Yeah. It's first time ever I played this, right? The landlord's here to visit. Blasting disco down below. She says I'm doubling the rent cause you didn't come down, and you were gonna help me by City Hall. But we can. You know what we can. Oh, we can. We know what we can. Let's lynch the landlord man. I tell him turn on the water. I tell him turn on the heat. Tells me all you ever do is complain. They search the place and I'm not here. But we can. We know what we can. But we can. You know what we can. Let's lynch the landlord man. Thank you everybody for joining the Socialist Sunday stream. Thank you good people in the chat. Have a great rest of the day and have a wonderful life. See you soon.